Morning. Thanks so much for being here. My name's Ryan, one of the pastors here at Grace, and I'd love to meet you. If maybe this is your first time here, I love how you kind of made your way to the campus today, maybe get some of your stories. So say hi on the way out. And I want to walk you through a couple things that are important to us here at Grace, even before we jump into the conversation. You may have seen out in the lobby there on the signs phrase, know it, live it, give it away. That is a phrase that really defines us as a church here. We say that it is the story of Jesus or the gospel. We say we want to know that story. We want to learn about Jesus and learn the Bible. And then we don't want to just stop with knowledge, though. We want to be changed by that. We want to live it. We want that to affect our hearts and our minds and our lives. And then we want that to extend outward. We want to give it away. And we want the world to be affected by the hope and the love of Jesus. And that's what we're all about. And I want to make sure you know that as you experience a service for the first time. Know it, live it, give it away. Really what defines us here as a church. And then we're jumping into a new series today that I'm pretty pumped about. It's called Resolve. And I got to give credit where credit is due. My good friend and fellow pastor, Tony Lavigny, out at our Medina East campus. We have 8 campuses here at Grace. They did some foundational work. They did a series like this, so I want to give him some credit for that. And definitely borrowed some of that. We share from each other, which is an awesome thing about being one church. Although our version will be a little bit different. They don't have a whiteboard, so we do. And they don't have the incredible artistic ability that I have. If you're new, man, just wait. It's incredible how good I am at art. It's amazing. I'm humble, and you're going to see how good I am at it. But we wanted to jump into the series that's really all about conflict and conflict resolution. And so it's going to be a big one. We're going to open up a can of worms here a little bit. And I want to give a little bit of a disclaimer, a couple disclaimers as we jump in. That I think are pretty important. First of all, let me just say this. If you want to learn more about this subject, conflict resolution kind of as a whole, if you're a reader or you're an audiobook person, it's a bigger book, but it probably is worth going through. It's called Peacemaker. If you want to kind of get your head around this at a deep level, that would be a great resource to grab hold of. Peacemaker is the name of the book if you want to learn more. And let me just say one more thing. Right before we kind of dive into our convo today. This series, you really want to think of this as one big conversation that we're going to have over many weeks, right? So every week you're going to get a kind of a piece of the conversation. And as we start to talk about the reality of broken relationships or forgiveness and how that all works in our lives and in our experiences, probably at some point along our journey, there might be an urge in you to take action and to move on maybe rebuilding a relationship or reaching out to somebody. And it's kind of rare, but I'm just going to ask you to wait until you've gone through the whole set of conversations so that you have the whole context of kind of how to do this in a way that's responsible and healthy. And I would hate to have you take an action and then think, oh man, I wish I would have heard that next week's message before I did that. So just walk the journey with us. And if you have to miss a week or something, you're not going to be around, just really encourage you to catch up online and catch the whole of this series, as I think it's going to be important to understand it all. And we're going to dive pretty deep into this and kind of unpack it. And today, what I really want to do is set the framing for the conversation and lay some basic foundational pieces that we can have the conversation over the next bunch of weeks. But it's important that we understand these building blocks and kind of the heart of where it is we're going and why this is so important. So let's dive into it. I want to show you kind of our theme verse for this series. It's going to be Romans 12:18. The Apostle Paul, leader in the early church, says this, and I love this sentence. It says, if it is possible, as far as it depends on you, live at peace with everyone. That thing is loaded, right? If it's possible, peace is not always possible, right? But as far as it depends on me, as far as my circle of responsibility is concerned, I want to do absolutely whatever I can to live at peace with everyone, right? With all the people. So not just the people I like or the people that I want to get along with, but with everyone. So I want to take a look and take a deep and a hard look always at the responsibility that I have to rebuild relationships, to extend forgiveness and to try to rebuild and reconcile when possible. There does come a point, I just want to say this, when peace in relationships moves beyond my circle of responsibility or control, and it goes to someone else's, and I can't control what somebody else does. I can only really take responsibility for myself, my own attitude, my own mindset, my own heart towards someone, and maybe my own initiative when needed to move towards another human being, right? If it's possible, as far as it depends on you, live at peace with everyone. And we're going to spend a lot of time talking deeply about the reality of that sentence and how that can look and how that can work. And this thing has enormous ramifications. You say, Ryan, why is this so important? When we're talking about resolving interpersonal breakdowns and relational breakdowns, there is enormous ramifications for kind of our quality of life, for the reputation of Jesus. You name it, there's going to be a massive impact to how I experience life and even for my impact on the planet based on how I interact and how I deal with my relational breakdowns. But let's dive into this a little bit, and we'll start to see how it unpacks. I want us to see some super important basic facts about relationships. When we look at the reality of people and how we're connected to one another, we are made for relationship. We're built that way. Love that the Bible says this. We're all the way back in creation, right? The writer says this. It says, then God said, let us make man in our image. So God himself, God, the Trinity, Father, Son, Holy Spirit, right, live in perfect harmony with each other. They're at peace. There's no conflict. They share in beautiful and perfect relationship at all times. And right, and it says, let us make mankind like us. That means a lot of things to be made in the image of God, but at the very least, it means that we're made to be relational. We're made to connect with each other and to live in harmony with one another. We're not made to be alone. In fact, that's one of the things that shows up in the early account of creation, that it's not good for man to be alone. It's not good for individuals or people to be alone and disconnected from relationship. Certainly, there are times when we need to pull away and have solitude. Jesus did that. But, right, and there's a reality that I can't live like that forever, or it's going to have an enormous impact on my life, my quality of life, even my mental health. And we would have experienced some of this, right, in the last couple of years. If you haven't been able to be around friends or family, you've been disconnected, you feel that a little bit. Feel isolated or disconnected, and you can feel the impact on you or see the impact on the people that you love. We are made to be relational. We're made to have friendships. We're made to have deep bonds as we strive together towards a united purpose, right? We're made for that stuff. We're made in the image of God, and certainly that, at the very least, encapsulates that definition that we're made to be relational. Now, I know that fact. I need relationships. I need people. People need me. And there's another fact that deeply affects this kind of math equation, and that's the fact that even though I need people and people need me, we are also individually broken. We have a massive impact on ourselves, and we are imperfect. Here's what the Bible would say: there's no one righteous, not even one. So we need each other. We need people. People need me. But I've got this kind of scar on me, and so does everybody else that I'm ever going to interact with. So I need people, but people are going to fail me. I need people, and people need me, but I'm going to fail them. So I need to be in relationship. I'm going to be in relationship. But what we just said, based on those two facts, is that if I need to be in relationship and I'm going to be imperfect and people are going to be imperfect to me, what we just concluded is that conflict is inevitable. It's going to happen. It would be impossible for it not to happen. If I'm imperfect and flawed and you're imperfect and flawed and we're going to be in a relationship, then we are going to hurt each other. We're going to rub each other the wrong way. We're going to bother each other. We're going to say something that bugs each other. We're going to sin against one another. Not if, but when. And just take a minute to think about that. If that's true, that all this math makes sense according to the scriptures, which there's so much wisdom built into this little math problem here that I think the Bible sets out for us, that means that solving how to deal with conflict when it shows up is an incredibly important skill. And what's really fascinating is, I don't know, I can't really think of a place that this skill is taught very much. I can't think of a course in school where you're taught, hey, we're going to bump into each other and have relational breakdown. Friends are going to get mad at each other and not want to talk anymore. And couples are going to want to have distance, separate. What do you do when that happens? I can't think of a place where that is described and clarified and equipped and trained. And if you grew up and you were taught how to do that, man, you are blessed. You have been raised in a fortunate situation, because for the majority of us, we were not raised with that kind of training and equipping. We don't know what to do with it. We're really surprised always when it happens. It's almost like we assume that either this person is going to be perfect and they're never going to fail me, or that I'm perfect and I'm never going to fail them. But we kind of know that that's not the case. So when the X shows up, it always kind of throws us for a loop, and we're not really sure what to do with it. So what usually happens then is we go, I don't really know what to do with this. That's a question mark, right? What do I do with this? And we start to go into instinct mode, right? We start to go into instinct mode. And there's a handful of responses that probably are going to feel a little bit familiar as we look at them. I might, when bumping into conflict, I might run into fight mode. You hurt me, guess what I'm going to do? I'm going to hurt you. We're going to war now, right? And that's going to be some of our initial reaction. Oh yeah, you want to go there? We're going, right? It's go time. And some of you are like, I'm in for the fight. You're like, I spark up. I kind of get excited about the conflict. Yeah, let's burn it to the ground, right? Scorched earth, let's do it, right? In fight mode, we're going to look at, the boss says something, I'm going to show him. I'll tell her. I'm going to blow up that friendship. I'm going to cause the other person to see how right I am. I would say for at least 50% of my life, I genuinely believed if I could logically show you my rightness, that you would have no option but to become convinced, and then we would be fine. Right? Someone laughed, and that's appropriate. That is, and some of you are like, that's not how things work. You need to be at this series, right? Folks, relationships often are not settled by arguing or by premise proving, but it's going to be our instinct. I'm going to escalate or argue or fight. I'm going to poke the bear. Whatever it is, I'm going to cause this conflict to go away by sheer force of power and will. And some of us, that's our initial instinct. I'm going to go into fight mode. Of course, right, some of us are going to be familiar with this. We could go into flight mode. And this tends to be often the Christian response, because we're nice, right? We're nice people. We're taught to be nice, and which really isn't even like a Bible thing, right? There's kindness, but you're not even really, niceness is something totally different. But we kind of want to be nice. We feel like that's a good thing to do. So when conflict shows up, we freak out a little bit. We're not sure what to do with it. And so we're like, you know what? That thing feels like it's messy and scary. And so I'm just going to go run away. I'll go find a new place to work. I got a problem at the job, and I don't know what to do with it. So you know what? I'm going to start looking for another job. And maybe God will open a door where I can find a new blessed opportunity to go run from my broken relationship. When really all I'm doing is I'm running to flight from a conflict that actually God wants me to solve. Doesn't mean you never need to lead your job or blah, blah, blah. But right, that's the church I just left, the friend I never talked to anymore, sometimes even the spouse that I left. Those often aren't motivated by rational, thought out, purposeful decisions. Often there's a gut instinct that I need to survive this thing, so I'm going to go do what I've done in the past. I'm running for the hills. I'm running for a new place to be safe. And in our minds, we think these people will be somehow very different than these people. And what do we discover? They're just as messed up as everybody else. And look, there's just me. I'm still messed up too. Right? And guys, I do it, you do it, we all do it. We've all run into one of these responses where I'm going to run away or I'm going to escalate. Or here's another one that tends to show up. And we're going to deny. Right? We're going to be in denial. Denial. Where I'm going to look at this X and say, you know what, this doesn't really exist. I'm going to pretend like this isn't true. I really value this relationship. I really want this friendship to work. I want this relationship to work. If I bring this thing up, I might put this at risk. So I'm going to tolerate this forever. And I'm just going to pretend. I'm going to cover this thing up and pretend it's not there. I'm going to kind of live in denial for a while. And what's eventually going to happen in that situation, you guys know this, I've done this, literally done this before myself, is I might try to do that for a while, and then eventually what happens is we end up with one of these two. I deny it for long enough, and then eventually the pain of that reality starts to catch up to me, and I decide I got to get out of this, I got to run away, or I need to escalate this thing, and finally, like a volcano, we explode and go into fight mode. Right? And hear me, there's sometimes, let me just say this real quick, there's sometimes situations where this conflict is genuinely abusive. There's different rules and kind of boundaries around abusive situations that we're going to bring some of that stuff up throughout the course of the series, right? There's a reality that if I'm not safe, sometimes the right thing to do is to get out of that situation and then figure out the healthy way to solve it later. Okay, sometimes that is the right thing to do, for sure, is to kind of fly away from that. But in your run-of-the-mill relational breakdowns that happen for most of us, these tend to be the outcomes that we are going to be drawn to. The Bible and God himself, right, his heart is that we would choose a different way and that we would purposefully, rationally work to resolve the conflict. To resolve the conflict. Resolving the conflict, as we opened with the first verse, does not mean that this relationship will end in the same place that it began if I work through this X. Does not mean that. It means that as far as it depends on me, I've done everything that I know how to do to make this thing right. As far as it depends on me, be at peace with all people. It's the heart of it. Most of us are never taught, myself included, right, growing up, that these options tend to be what causes trouble for us, and that there's actually a different way. There's a different way that we can respond, and there's a way that leads to life and to healing and can actually save us from enormous difficulty and trouble. I like to say a lot, I just observed this, I think you can probably see it pretty easily in life, that when as people get older, the evidence of how they've dealt with this picture, I think, shows up more and more. Right? You tend to see older people land in like one of two kind of extreme places. You either in a place where you are a person who is filled with joy and life and vitality and maturity. Somehow this person has figured out how to manage and navigate through broken relationships and pain and difficulty in life, and they've landed in a place where even though life can be hard, there's a joy in their eyes, and people are drawn to them, right? And we all know people like that. You're like, man, how did they do that? That's incredible. And then there's like the older person that's like super grumpy and kind of bitter, and you just seem kind of mad, right? And let me just say this. That trajectory of a joy-filled, vital life, right, where life and vitality is kind of overflowing from me, or a life of bitterness and a hardness of heart, that trajectory is being formed in you and I right now. If you're 12 or 20 or 50 or 70. That this person didn't set out to land here. Nobody says, when I grow up, you know what I want to be? Bitter and grumpy. That's my life's goal, right? No, 0 people say that. I don't know anyone in their 20s that's aiming at that. But that is the place that gets hit sometimes. It happens. That is happening to you and I right now. Little baby steps on the way to one of those 2 paths. And I would submit to you that a good portion, if not the majority portion, of what determines that has to do with this conversation. Because the wreckage of broken relationships, the wreckage of fled relationships, a lifestyle of stuffing and pretending like I'm not struggling with a relational issue, a lifetime of that has an enormous effect on us and on how we experience life. You know, what's interesting is you can kind of contain it for a while. I don't know if you've ever seen this before. You can contain it for a while and kind of lie to ourselves for a while. That I'm not angry and bitter at everybody. I'm not mad and angry at everyone. I'm only angry at that friend who hurt me or that ex. All of my bitterness is contained in this bucket. And it kind of is like that for a little while until it's not. Until that bitterness begins to overflow from that relationship and starts to poison my view and my perspective on other relationships. And that bitterness is going to start to overflow in ways that I did not foresee and I cannot control. Look what the writer of Hebrews says. He says, make every effort to live in peace with everyone and to be holy. Without holiness, no one will see the Lord. Right? Make every effort to live in peace. Watch where it goes. See to it that no one falls short of the grace of God. God has had enormous grace on us. It says, and that no bitter root grows up to cause trouble and defile many. The writer is talking to a group of people, and he's recognizing that what can happen in me is bitterness can take root in my heart, and that bitterness can begin to define me, and that bitterness will not be contained only to my life and my heart. It's going to pour out over, and it will affect the people around me. It will poison them and taint them and affect them, and my poisonous perspective begins to have ramification and cause harm to others. This thing is massive, massive. And right, some of you are going to say to me, somebody who said after service, Ryan, this is a really important conversation. I kind of wish we didn't have to go there. I kind of wish we didn't have to go there too. But at the end of the day, if God loves us and cares for us and wants what's best for us, then what he's going to do is he's going to drive us into this conversation and help us to deal with some of the hardest things. Why? Because often in the hardest places is where the most fruit is born. The hardest work often bears the greatest fruit, and the work of forgiveness or of resolving a relationship or doing all that I can to be at peace with people is going to have an enormous return on my level of joy, on the existence of bitterness in my heart or not. You can only imagine the impact that would be had if this conversation was given more attention. Can you even imagine the relationships that would still be intact, the friendships that would still be intact, the marriages that maybe didn't need to break down, that could still be, the churches that wouldn't have split, the families that wouldn't be in turmoil. You imagine what could have been, the wreckage that could have been prevented if we just got kind of good at doing the really hard thing and nipped it in the bud and dealt with it and resolved it. Instead of fighting and escalating, instead of running away, instead of pretending like we're not imperfect people that hurt each other, if we just started with this picture and said, oh, this is kind of how it is, we've got to figure out how to face this. Even though it's awkward and uncomfortable and super humbling because, man, I'm messed up. I can't just land in a place where I look at you and say, look how terrible you are. I have to go back and say, oh, I was kind of terrible too. Right? It's hard. But if we actually did the work and we were actually open to it, what kind of wreckage would have been saved? And here's the really important part. If I get a hold of this wreckage now, what might be prevented in the future? Because here's the heart of the Father, right? God the Father. He tells us all this stuff, I think, with enormous importance and reverence. He says, blessed are the peacemakers, right? Blessed are the peacemakers, for they shall see God. They're the ones that reflect the heart and mind of God. As God created these people, you and me, right? He knows the reality of our scar, of our imperfection. He knows that all of this is like this. And what he longs for, his will for us, we can say, is that we live in peace and harmony with one another. He loves that stuff. He loves it. He longs, especially within his church, especially the people that would say, I'm a follower of Jesus. I have received the forgiveness of my sins. He longs for his children to live at harmony with one another. If you have kids, you know how deeply you long for your kids to live at harmony with each other. If you have parents, your parents, they want you to get along. If they're healthy, they're going to want brother and sister, or sister, they're going to want that all to live in harmony with one another. Mom loves to gather all the kids at holidays and see them all at once and wants that to be a peaceful environment. Why? That reflects the heart of the Father. He loves that stuff. Here's the thing, guys. 2022. We've got all kinds of advancements. Literally have a high-powered computer in my hand that I put in my pocket all day. We can shoot a vehicle to the moon, right? There's we go on and on and on about all kinds of technological things and advancements that we've figured out. The basic work of two human beings getting along, that's still kind of a mystery for us. And it's actually where the good stuff of life really is found, the most important things. Great friendships and great relationships, great marriages, great relationships with children or parents. great relationships within the church, great relationships on the team, pursuing the purpose of advancing the kingdom. This skill set is incredibly important to all of the things that we really care about at the deepest levels. See why it matters so much. Because this is going to be the journey we're going to take. We're not going to solve every problem. We're not going to be able to figure out every little scenario, but we want to walk through principles of how we might start to address this, what it might look like. You say, Ryan, where do we start with it? I think we have to start by being really, really honest about the state of our relationships and the state of our heart towards them. I think that's got to be the beginning point for today. Like if we were to land somewhere, I think we ought to land there. If I were to look back at the relationships that I have and start to ask myself, where are they? What's my pattern kind of been? What do I tend to do? And I can see all of these words show up in my dealing with relationships in the course of my life. I think we should turn and ask that question to ourselves today, right? But before I'm ready to go kind of work through something with somebody else, I need to start to ask the question, what does my heart look like, and what has my history been, and kind of where am I in all this? I actually think this would be incredibly important to the Lord that we start here. Because I'm going to ask us to do something we don't do a lot. I'm going to ask you, if you'd be willing, if you would bow your heads and close your eyes with me. I just want to ask a few questions, if you'd be willing to do that. Just bow your heads, close your eyes, if you'd be willing. As we're quiet here for a little bit, I just want to ask you the question. When you look back and you think about your days and your history with people, your friendships, your work relationships, your church relationships, has there been fighting and fleeing and denying that showed up in your history, right? Maybe a question to wrestle through. Here's a question that I'd love for us all to answer. If you look today at the state of your relationships and the state of your heart, if I asked you, is there anybody that you're withholding forgiveness from? Or if there's any broken relationships in your life right now, I'd ask you, would you be willing to raise your hand and admit that today? If you're withholding forgiveness, or if there's a broken relationship in your life, just between you, me, and the Lord. You can put your hands down. With eyes closed and heads bowed, I'd ask you, would you be willing to deal with that relationship differently this time? Maybe there's one, or maybe there's a bunch. Would you be open to learning how to resolve it in a way that is pleasing to God and freeing to you? Really something only that Christ can do. Would you wrestle through that this morning as we start down this road and kind of take this journey together to learning a new way, being honest about how relationships have worked in our lives? Father, we need your help with this. Lord, we need your help to be honest, to be as honest as we can be and as clear about ourselves as you are with us. Lord, you see every unforgiveness and every broken relationship that's in our past. God, I pray that you would give us courage to be people that do hard things. It's who we are. We're your children. We're your creation. Would you lead us, Lord, into a different way? A way that doesn't cause more pain, that shuts off the valve of bitterness and anger and destruction. A way that can ultimately lead to forgiveness and peace and even joy. God, would you meet us here? Help us with this. Be our God and Father in this day.